Marcus Chun had always been different from other people. While his neighbors in rural Montana complained about slow internet and bad cell phone service, Marcus spent his evenings in his massive garage workshop, building things that most humans wouldn't understand for another century. The garage looked ordinary from the outside. Old wooden boards, a rusty metal roof, and weeds growing around the foundation. Inside was a different story. Advanced holographic displays floated in the air, showing complex mathematical equations that would make quantum physicists weep with joy. Sleek metal panels lined the walls, humming with energy that came from a power source Marcus had invented when he was 16. Marcus wasn't entirely human, though he had never told anyone that secret. His grandmother had been something else, something that came from the stars long before humans learned to make fire. She had passed down knowledge through genetic memory, knowledge that activated in Marcus when he turned 25. Now, at 32, he had spent 7 years building something extraordinary. The spaceship didn't look like the rockets NASA launched. It was smooth and organic, like a giant teardrop made of living metal. The hull could repair itself, adapt to different environments, and become invisible to most scanning technologies. Marcus had named it the Wanderer, though he had never planned to use it for wandering. He built it because something deep in his inherited memories told him that one day, Earth would need protection. That day arrived on a Tuesday morning in October. Marcus was calibrating the ship's defensive systems when every screen in his workshop suddenly changed. Emergency broadcasts filled the displays, showing the same terrifying image from around the world. Massive alien vessels, each the size of a city, had appeared in Earth's orbit without warning. The ships were dark and angular, covered in weapons that made human military technology look like children's toys. The alien commander's message played across every communication device on Earth. The being looked humanoid but wrong, with too pale skin, black eyes that reflected no light, and a voice that sounded like grinding metal. "Humans of Earth," the commander said, "I am War Leader Keth of the Valdorian Empire. Your species has been judged unworthy of continued existence. You pollute your world, fight endless wars, and show no respect for other life forms. We have decided to cleanse this planet and use it for our own purposes. You have 72 hours to prepare for extinction." The broadcast ended, leaving Earth in chaos. News channels showed panic in every major city. Governments launched nuclear missiles at the alien ships, but the weapons simply vanished before impact, absorbed by energy shields that humans couldn't even detect properly. Military jets fired their most advanced weapons, achieving nothing except proving how helpless humanity truly was. Marcus stood in his garage, watching the world react to its approaching doom. He felt calm, which surprised him. The inherited memories in his mind were activating, showing him things his grandmother's people had known about the Valdorians. They were an ancient race that traveled from world to world, destroying civilizations they deemed unworthy. They had wiped out hundreds of species across the galaxy. But Marcus also knew something the Valdorians didn't expect. Earth wasn't as defenseless as it appeared. He walked to the Wanderer and placed his hand on its hull. The metal felt warm and alive under his palm. The ship's artificial intelligence, which Marcus had built using technology that wouldn't be invented by humans for another 1,000 years, spoke to him through direct neural connection. "Marcus," the AI said in a voice only he could hear, "I am detecting 17 Valdorian dreadnoughts in high orbit. Each ship carries enough firepower to destroy a continent. Their shields are operating at maximum efficiency. Shall I begin combat preparations?" "Not yet, Arya," Marcus replied, using the name he had given the AI. "Let me think about this." Marcus had spent years preparing for the possibility that hostile aliens might find Earth. His grandmother's memories included stories about the Valdorians and their methods. They always gave their targets a few days to suffer in fear before the actual attack. It was part of their psychological warfare strategy. They wanted civilizations to break down completely before the end came. But the Valdorians had made one critical mistake. They assumed that all species on a planet would be at the same technological level. They didn't know that Marcus existed, or that he had access to technology that predated their empire by millions of years. Marcus activated his communication array, which could reach anywhere in the solar system instantly. He sent a carefully coded message to his only friend who knew about his true nature, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who worked at the SETI Institute in California. "Sarah," he said when her face appeared on a screen, "I know this sounds crazy, but I think I can help." Sarah looked exhausted and terrified. Behind her, Marcus could see other scientists running around in panic, trying to find some way to communicate with the aliens. "Marcus, thank God you called. It's complete chaos here. The military wants us to try to establish communication, but the aliens aren't responding to anything we send them." "That's because they don't want to talk," Marcus said. "They've already decided what they're going to do. But, Sarah, I need you to trust me. I'm going to try something, but I need you to make sure no one interferes." "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked. "Marcus, these are aliens with technology beyond anything we can imagine. What could you possibly do?" Marcus looked at his spaceship, then back at Sarah. He had never told her the full truth about what he was building in his garage. She knew he was brilliant, that he invented things that seemed impossible, but she didn't know about his alien heritage or the real purpose of his work. "I've been building something," he said carefully, "something that might be able to help. But I need you to monitor the situation from your end. When I make my move, there's going to be a reaction. I need someone I trust to let me know what's happening on Earth while I'm dealing with the Valdorians." Sarah stared at him through the screen. "Marcus, you're scaring me. What exactly have you built?" "A spaceship," Marcus said simply. "A really, really good spaceship." Before Sarah could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the SETI facility. Someone shouted in the background that the alien ships were moving into attack formation. Marcus could see the fear in Sarah's eyes growing stronger. "I have to go," Marcus said. "Sarah, trust me. And whatever happens, don't let anyone try to stop me when I launch." He ended the communication and turned to face the Wanderer. The ship was already responding to his emotional state, its hull beginning to glow with a soft blue light. The garage doors, which looked like normal wooden panels from outside, split apart to reveal the opening Marcus had built for this exact moment. Marcus climbed into the ship's cockpit, which molded itself around his body like a second skin. The neural interface connected with his mind, giving him access to sensors and capabilities that human language couldn't properly describe. Through the ship's eyes, he could see the Valdorian fleet in orbit, their massive forms blotting out stars. "Arya," he said, "show me their formation." Holographic displays filled the cockpit, showing Marcus every detail of the alien fleet. The Valdorians had arranged their ships in a perfect sphere around Earth, with their weapons aimed at every major population center. They were preparing for a simultaneous strike that would eliminate most of humanity in the first few minutes of their attack. Marcus studied the formation, his inherited memories providing tactical knowledge that his human side couldn't have understood. The Valdorians were powerful, but they were also arrogant. They had arranged their fleet for maximum psychological impact, not for maximum defensive capability. They expected no resistance from Earth, so they hadn't bothered to protect against threats from below. "Calculate trajectory for orbital insertion," Marcus commanded. "Stealth mode maximum. I want to get close enough to touch their lead ship before they know I'm there." "Trajectory calculated," Arya replied. "Warning, this approach will require passing through the debris field created by the destruction of the International Space Station." Marcus felt a moment of sadness. The aliens had destroyed the ISS as a demonstration of their power, killing the 6 astronauts aboard without even acknowledging their existence. It was exactly the kind of casual cruelty that made Marcus's alien heritage react with cold anger. "Execute launch sequence," he said. The Wanderer rose silently from the garage, its hull shifting to become completely transparent to every form of detection the Valdorians might use. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of gravity disappearing as the ship's advanced drive systems engaged. Unlike human rockets, which fought against gravity with brute force, the Wanderer simply convinced local space-time that it wanted to be somewhere else. As Earth fell away below him, Marcus could see the alien ships more clearly. Each dreadnought was a work of art in its own terrible way, covered in weapons that could crack planets and shields that could absorb the energy of stars. The lead ship was larger than the others, clearly the flagship of war leader Keth. Marcus guided the Wanderer through the debris field that had once been humanity's greatest achievement in space. Pieces of the ISS drifted past his ship like metallic snow, each fragment representing dreams of exploration and discovery that had been casually destroyed. Marcus, Arya said, I'm detecting increased activity aboard the Valdorian flagship. They appear to be preparing for the final phase of their attack. How long do we have? Marcus asked. Approximately 6 hours before they begin planetary bombardment. Marcus nodded. 6 hours to save his world. It should have felt impossible, but the knowledge flowing through his mind from his grandmother's people told him it was enough. The Valdorians had no idea what they were about to face. As the Wanderer approached the alien fleet, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what he was attempting. These weren't just ships. They were mobile cities, each carrying millions of Valdorian soldiers and enough firepower to sterilize entire solar systems. The empire they represented had conquered most of the galaxy, destroying any species that didn't meet their arbitrary standards of worthiness. But Marcus also understood something else. The Valdorians had grown complacent in their dominance. They had forgotten that sometimes the smallest and most unexpected threats could bring down the mightiest empires. His ship was now less than 1,000 kilometers from the flagship, close enough for detailed scanning. What Marcus saw through his sensors made him smile for the first time since the invasion began. The Valdorians had made their second critical mistake. Their ships were powerful, but they were also incredibly complex, relying on interconnected systems that created vulnerabilities for anyone who understood how they worked. And, thanks to his inherited memories, Marcus understood them perfectly. His grandmother's people had fought the Valdorians millions of years ago, before Earth even existed. They had lost that war, but not before learning every secret of Valdorian technology. That knowledge had been passed down through genetic memory, waiting for the moment when it would be needed again. Arya, Marcus said, his voice filled with quiet confidence, begin detailed analysis of their primary command vessel. I want to know everything about their shields, weapons, and command structure. Analysis complete, the AI replied after a few seconds. Marcus, their technology is exactly as your inherited memory suggested. I can identify 17 critical vulnerabilities in their primary systems. Marcus felt the cold satisfaction of a predator that had found its prey. The Valdorians thought they were facing a primitive species with nuclear weapons and chemical rockets. They had no idea that one of their ancient enemies had left a gift on this small blue world. Target their shield generators first, Marcus commanded. We're going to give them a demonstration of what Earth can really do. The Wanderer moved closer to the flagship, its hull still invisible to Valdorian sensors. Marcus could see alien figures moving through the ship's corridors, preparing for the slaughter of humanity. War leader Keth stood on his command bridge, watching Earth turn below him like a hunter studying wounded prey. In a few minutes, the Valdorians would learn that their prey was not as helpless as they believed. Marcus was about to remind the galaxy that sometimes the hunted could become the hunter. War leader Keth stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the small blue world rotate beneath his fleet. Earth looked peaceful from orbit, its white clouds swirling over green and brown continents. Keth had destroyed 43 worlds during his career, and they all looked peaceful from space before he cleansed them. Status report, Keth commanded, his metallic voice echoing through the bridge. Subcommander Vex, his second in command, consulted the tactical displays floating around the command center. All dreadnoughts report ready status, war leader. Planetary bombardment systems are charged and targeted. We can begin extinction protocols at your command. Keth nodded, satisfied. The humans had tried their primitive nuclear weapons, and conventional missiles, just as expected. Every species did the same thing when faced with Valdorian superiority. They fought with everything they had, achieved nothing, then spent their final hours in despair and panic. What is the status of human communication attempts? Keth asked. Constant but irrelevant, Vex replied. They are broadcasting surrender offers, pleas for mercy, and requests for negotiation on all frequencies. Standard behavior for a species facing extinction. Keth felt the familiar satisfaction of absolute power. The Valdorian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years by following simple principles. Weak species were eliminated. Strong species were enslaved or destroyed if they resisted. There were no exceptions, no mercy, no second chances. Maintain current orbital position, Keth ordered. Let them suffer for another few hours. Fear makes the cleansing more efficient. What Keth didn't know was that Marcus Chen's ship was already inside his fleet's defensive perimeter, moving silently between the massive dreadnoughts like a shadow. The Wanderer was so small compared to the Valdorian ships that even if their sensors could detect it, they would have dismissed it as space debris. Marcus studied the flagship structure through his advanced sensors. The ship was over 20 kilometers long, shaped like a blade with weapon ports covering every surface. Its shields could deflect the combined nuclear arsenal of Earth without strain. Its weapons could boil oceans and crack continents. By every reasonable measure, the Eternal Dominion was invincible. But Marcus wasn't thinking in reasonable terms. He was thinking like his grandmother's people, who had learned to fight enemies far stronger than themselves by understanding that no technology was perfect. Every system had weaknesses. Every design had flaws. The key was knowing where to look. Arya, Marcus said, show me their shield generator configuration. The AI projected a detailed schematic of the flagship's defensive systems. Marcus smiled as he recognized the design. The Valdorians used the same shield technology they had employed millions of years ago, improved but not fundamentally changed. His inherited memories showed him exactly how those shields worked and, more importantly, how they could be disrupted. Their shields operate on a rotating frequency pattern, Marcus observed. Every 17 seconds, there's a phase shift that creates a brief vulnerability window. If we time our approach correctly, we can penetrate their defenses without triggering their alarm systems. Confirmed, Arya replied. However, once inside their shield perimeter, we will be vulnerable to their point defense weapons. Marcus studied the weapon placements on the flagship's hull. The ship carried thousands of defensive turrets, each capable of destroying conventional spacecraft with a single shot. But, like everything else about Valdorian technology, the weapons were designed to fight enemies who use predictable tactics and familiar technology. Their targeting systems expect threats to approach in straight lines at consistent velocities, Marcus said. Show me a flight path that uses random vector changes and acceleration patterns outside their prediction algorithms. Arya calculated for several seconds, then displayed a route that looked like a three-dimensional zigzag pattern through space. This trajectory will require precise timing and could subject you to dangerous G-forces. Do it, Marcus commanded. The Wanderer began its approach to the flagship, moving in ways that violated every principle of conventional spacecraft design. The ship changed direction without apparent thrust, accelerated beyond what its visible mass should allow, and followed a path that seemed to predict where the Valdorian weapons would be aiming before they actually aimed there. Inside the Eternal Dominion, Subcommander Vex was monitoring the fleet sensor networks when something unusual appeared on his displays. For just a moment, their detection grid showed a small object moving between the dreadnoughts, but the reading vanished before he could analyze it properly. Sensor technician racks, Vex called. Are you detecting any anomalies in local space? Technician Rax examined his instruments carefully. The Valdorian sensor systems could detect objects as small as pebbles within a 1,000,000-kilometer radius, track the movement of individual atoms in nearby atmospheres, and analyze the chemical composition of distant stars. Nothing could approach a Valdorian fleet without being noticed. Sensors show normal space debris, Subcommander, Rax reported. Some fragments from the destroyed space station, various pieces of human orbital junk, but nothing that could pose a threat. Vex nodded, dismissing his concerns. Human technology was so primitive that they couldn't possibly have anything capable of threatening Valdorian ships. The readings he had seen were probably just sensor echoes from the planet's magnetic field. Meanwhile, Marcus was now less than 500 meters from the flagship's hull, close enough to see individual Valdorians moving through transparent sections of a ship. The aliens looked even more disturbing up close. Their pale skin seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and their black eyes showed no emotion as they prepared for the destruction of an entire world. Beginning final approach, Marcus announced, "Target the primary shield generator cluster on the flagship's dorsal section." The Wanderer moved closer, its hull now almost touching the Valdorian ship. Marcus could feel the massive vessel's artificial gravity trying to pull his ship against its armor plating. The flagship's shields crackled with energy just meters away, powerful enough to vaporize anything that tried to pass through them. "Shield phase shift in 10 seconds, Arya announced. 9, 8, 7. Marcus prepared himself for what came next. In a few seconds, he would either save Earth or die trying. There was no middle ground against enemies like the Valdorians. They understood only strength and destruction. Marcus was about to show them both. 3, 2, 1, phase shift detected. Window is open. The Wanderer slipped through the flagship's shields like a needle through fabric, entering the space between the protective barrier and the ship's hull. For a brief moment, Marcus was inside the most dangerous defensive system in the galaxy, surrounded by enough destructive energy to power entire star systems. "We're through," Marcus said, feeling his heart rate slow to normal. "Begin infiltration sequence." The Wanderer extended microscopic tendrils from its hull, each one thinner than human hair, but stronger than diamond. The tendrils penetrated the flagship's outer armor, which was designed to withstand planet-killing weapons, but not prepared for invasion by technology that could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Marcus felt the ship's systems connect with the Valdorian computer networks. It was like touching the mind of a vast, cold intelligence that thought only in terms of destruction and domination. The flagship's AI was powerful but rigid, following programming that had remained unchanged for thousands of years. "I'm in their primary command systems," Marcus announced. "Arya, begin data extraction. I want complete intelligence on their fleet composition, weapons capabilities, and command structure." Information flooded into Marcus's mind faster than human consciousness could process. He saw the true scope of the Valdorian Empire, stretching across half the galaxy and controlling thousands of star systems. He saw records of worlds they had destroyed, species they had exterminated, and civilizations they had erased from existence. But he also saw their weaknesses. The Valdorians had grown complacent after 50,000 years of easy victories. Their military doctrine hadn't changed in millennia. Their technology was powerful but predictable. Most importantly, their command structure was rigidly hierarchical, dependent on constant communication between war leader Keth and his subordinate commanders. "Marcus," Arya said urgently, "I'm detecting increased activity in their weapons systems. They're beginning final targeting sequences for planetary bombardment." Through the ship's sensors, Marcus could see Earth hanging in space below the fleet. Somewhere on that world, 8 billion people were living through their last hours without knowing it. Children were playing in schoolyards. Families were eating dinner. Scientists like Sarah Mitchell were desperately trying to find a way to communicate with humanity's destroyers. Marcus felt anger building in his chest, cold and focused like his grandmother's people had taught him. The Valdorians saw themselves as judges of worthiness, but they were nothing more than cosmic bullies who destroyed anything different from themselves. They had murdered countless civilizations across the galaxy, and now they wanted to add Earth to their collection of dead worlds. "Change of plans," Marcus said. "We're not just gathering intelligence. We're going to send these bastards a message they'll never forget. Marcus began to understand the flagship's internal layout through his neural connection to its systems. The ship was essentially a floating city, with millions of Aldorians living and working in its corridors. The command center where War Leader Keth stood was heavily protected, surrounded by layers of armor and defensive systems that made it nearly impregnable. But nearly wasn't good enough when facing technology that could rewrite the laws of physics. Arya, can you access their internal communication systems? Yes, but any transmission will alert them to our presence. Marcus smiled grimly. That's exactly what I want. Open a channel to War Leader Keth's personal communicator. On the command bridge of the Eternal Dominion, War Leader Keth was reviewing the final bombardment sequences when his personal communication device suddenly activated without authorization. Such a thing was impossible. The device was encrypted with quantum algorithms that would take entire civilizations centuries to break. War Leader Keth, said a voice speaking perfect Valdorian with an accent that made Keth's blood freeze in his veins. It was the accent of the Old Ones, the species that had fought the Valdorian Empire millions of years ago and had nearly destroyed it before being eliminated. Who dares to speak to me? Keth demanded, his metallic voice rising in pitch. Around him, bridge officers stopped their work and stared in shock. Nothing could penetrate Valdorian communications without authorization. My name is Marcus Chun, the voice replied calmly. I'm a human, but I'm also something else. Something your people thought they had destroyed long ago. I'm here to tell you that Earth is under my protection. Keth felt fear for the first time in centuries. The Old Ones had been extinct for millions of years. Their worlds were dead, their technology destroyed, their entire species wiped from the galaxy. It was impossible for any of them to still exist. You lie, Keth snarled. The Old Ones are extinct. We made certain of that. You made certain that their worlds were destroyed, Marcus replied. But some of them escaped. Some of them found new homes, new species to protect. My grandmother was one of them. She passed her knowledge to me through genetic memory, and I've spent years preparing for this moment. Keth spun toward his tactical displays, ordering his sensors to scan for any sign of Old One technology. The screens showed normal space around his fleet, empty except for debris and the pathetic remnants of human orbital installations. Scan harder, Marcus suggested, and suddenly the displays changed. The sensors now showed a small spacecraft attached to the Eternal Dominion's hull like a parasite. The ship's design was unmistakably Old One technology, smooth and organic, radiating energy signatures that Valdorian instruments could barely detect. Worse, the ship appeared to be directly connected to the flagship's computer systems. Impossible, Keth whispered. Your people always underestimate their enemies, Marcus said. You assume that everyone thinks like you, fights like you, builds technology like you. But the Old Ones were different. We learned to be subtle, to work with nature instead of against it, to find strength in cooperation instead of domination. Alarms began blaring throughout the flagship as Marcus demonstrated his point. Every computer system in the ship started experiencing simultaneous malfunctions. Lights flickered, gravity generators fluctuated, and weapon targeting systems began showing random error messages. What are you doing to my ship? Keth demanded. I'm teaching you a lesson about consequences, Marcus replied. For 50,000 years, your empire has murdered innocent species across the galaxy. You've appointed yourselves as judges of worthiness, but you're nothing more than cosmic parasites. Today, that ends. Keth watched in horror as his tactical displays showed similar malfunctions beginning throughout the entire fleet. Somehow, the single small ship attached to his flagship was affecting every Valdorian vessel in orbit. Systems that had operated flawlessly for millennia were suddenly failing in ways that seemed impossible. This is some kind of trick, Keth said, but his voice lacked conviction. No trick, Marcus replied. Just superior technology applied by someone who understands your weaknesses better than you do. The Old Ones fought your empire once before, and even though you destroyed our worlds, we learned how to hurt you. That knowledge has been waiting for the right moment to be used again. Through his connection to the flagship systems, Marcus could see the panic spreading through the Valdorian fleet. Ship commanders were reporting cascading system failures, weapon malfunctions, and communication breakdowns. The perfect military formation was dissolving into chaos as the most advanced fleet in the galaxy suddenly found itself helpless. "I'll give you one chance," Marcus said. "Withdraw your fleet from Earth immediately, and I'll let you leave with your ships intact. Stay here, and I'll show you what happens to bullies who threaten my world." War leader Keth stared at his displays, watching 50,000 years of Valdorian supremacy crumbling before his eyes. The old ones were supposed to be extinct. Earth was supposed to be defenseless. This entire situation was impossible according to everything the Empire believed about itself. But the evidence was undeniable. A single human ship was systematically dismantling the most powerful fleet in galactic history, using technology that Valdorian science couldn't explain or counter. For the first time in his career, War Leader Keth faced a choice between his pride and his survival. War Leader Keth's pride won the internal battle against his survival instincts, just as Marcus had expected it would. The Valdorians had ruled the galaxy for so long that they couldn't imagine actually losing to anyone, especially not to a primitive species like humanity. "I refuse your terms," Keth announced, his metallic voice filled with rage. "The Valdorian Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. We will cleanse this world regardless of whatever tricks you're using." Marcus felt disappointment, but not surprise. Through his inherited memories, he knew how the Valdorians thought. They saw compromise as weakness and negotiation as surrender. They had built their empire on the principle that might made right, and they couldn't conceive of a universe where that principle might be wrong. "Then, you've chosen the hard way," Marcus said calmly. "I was hoping you might be smarter than your ancestors, but apparently stupidity is a universal constant among your species." On the flagship's command bridge, Subcommander Vex was frantically trying to regain control of their systems. The tactical displays showed chaos throughout the fleet as ship after ship reported critical failures in essential systems. Weapons that had destroyed planets were refusing to fire. Shields that could deflect the energy of stars were flickering like candles in the wind. War Leader Vex said urgently, "We must consider tactical withdrawal. Our ships are experiencing unprecedented system failures. If this continues, we will lose combat effectiveness entirely." Keth turned toward his second-in-command with fury burning in his black eyes. "We do not retreat from primitive species. Find a solution to these malfunctions immediately." "Sir, our engineers report that the system failures appear to be caused by some form of adaptive virus that is rewriting our core programming. Every time they repair one system, 10 others begin experiencing new problems." Marcus listened to the conversation through the flagship's communication networks, feeling grim satisfaction. His grandmother's people had spent millions of years studying Valdorian technology, learning its strengths and weaknesses. They had discovered that the Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest vulnerability. Valdorian technology was incredibly advanced, but completely standardized. Every ship in their fleet used the same basic designs, the same operating systems, the same command protocols. This standardization made their military incredibly efficient, but it also meant that anyone who could hack one ship could potentially hack them all. "Arya," Marcus said, "initiate Phase 2. Begin systematic shutdown of their weapon systems across the entire fleet." The AI went to work with digital precision that would have impressed even Valdorian computer specialists. Across 17 dreadnoughts, primary weapon systems began powering down as their targeting computers received instructions that convinced them they were in the wrong position to fire safely. Secondary weapons locked themselves into maintenance modes, following diagnostic routines that would take hours to complete. Point defense systems started tracking imaginary targets, spinning uselessly through empty space. In less than 10 minutes, the The most powerful military fleet in galactic history had been reduced to a collection of helpless metal shells drifting around Earth. But Marcus wasn't finished. The Valdorians needed to understand that their defeat wasn't just a technical malfunction or a lucky accident. They needed to know that they had been outfought by a superior opponent using superior tactics and technology. War leader Keth. Marcus said, reopening the communication channel, I want you to look at your tactical displays and understand what just happened. Your entire fleet has been neutralized by a single ship piloted by one person. Your 50,000-year empire just lost a battle against a species you dismissed as primitive. Keth stared at the displays, showing his helpless fleet, his mind struggling to process the reality of total defeat. Every military doctrine he had ever learned told him that such a scenario was impossible. Valdorian technology was supreme. Valdorian tactics were proven across countless victories. How could everything be failing at once? This is not a fair battle, Keth protested. You're using some form of advanced technology that violates the normal rules of warfare. Marcus laughed, and the sound echoed through the flagship's communication systems with bitter irony. Fair? You came to my world with 17 dreadnoughts to exterminate 8 billion innocent people, and you're complaining about fairness? Did you offer fair battles to the other species you've destroyed across the galaxy? Through his connection to the Valdorian database, Marcus had access to their historical records. He could see the long list of worlds they had sterilized, species they had eliminated, civilizations they had erased. Hundreds of intelligent races had faced extinction at Valdorian hands, and none of them had been given a chance to fight on equal terms. The creatures we eliminated were judged unworthy, Keth said. They lacked the strength and purity necessary for galactic citizenship. Judged by whom? Marcus demanded. Who gave your species the right to decide which civilizations deserve to live? What makes you so special that you get to play God with the entire galaxy? Keth had no answer. The question struck at the fundamental assumptions that Valdorian society was built upon. For 50,000 years, they had told themselves that their conquests were justified by their superiority, that their victims deserved destruction because they were weak. The possibility that they might be wrong had never been seriously considered. Marcus decided to drive the point home. Arya, show them the truth about their glorious empire. The AI hacked into the flagship's main display systems, replacing the tactical readouts with historical footage from the Valdorian archives. The screens now showed images of worlds burning under Valdorian bombardment, of alien families fleeing in terror, of entire species crying out for mercy that never came. This is what your empire really is, Marcus said as the horrific images played across every screen in the fleet. You're not noble warriors or wise judges. You're mass murderers who convince yourselves that genocide is justified because you're stronger than your victims. The bridge crew of the Eternal Dominion watched in uncomfortable silence as their empire's true history played out before them. Most of them had participated in planetary cleansings, but they had always been told that their actions were necessary for the greater good of galactic civilization. Seeing the reality of their victims' suffering made that rationalization harder to maintain. Marcus could feel the psychological impact of his demonstration through the ship's communication networks. Individual Valdorians throughout the fleet were beginning to question orders, to wonder if what they were doing was actually right. The rigid discipline that held the Empire together was starting to crack under the weight of moral doubt. You have shown us propaganda and lies, Keth said, but his voice lacked its previous conviction. These images prove nothing except that war is sometimes necessary. War, Marcus replied. This isn't war. War implies that both sides have a chance to fight. What you do is extermination. You attack species that can't defend themselves, then claim victory as if you've accomplished something meaningful. Marcus paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. But today is different. Today, you picked a fight with someone who can fight back. How does it feel to be on the receiving end for once? To emphasize his point, Marcus had Arya demonstrate the Wanderer's true capabilities. The small ship detached itself from the flagship's hull and began moving through the disabled fleet like a predator among helpless prey. It moved in ways that violated basic principles of physics, changing direction without thrust, accelerating beyond what should have been possible, and projecting energy signatures that made Valdorian sensors give contradictory readings. As the Wanderer moved, it continued its systematic dismantling of the fleet's capabilities. Communication arrays that had coordinated galactic conquests were reduced to scrap metal by precisely targeted energy beams. Computer cores that had stored 50,000 years of military knowledge were wiped clean by viral programs that turned their own security systems against them. Life support systems were left intact, but everything else that made the ships functional was methodically destroyed. "Impossible," Subcommander Vex whispered as he watched a single, small vessel dismantle the pride of the Valdorian Empire. "Our shields should stop those energy weapons. Our armor should protect our vital systems. How is it penetrating our defenses?" Marcus heard the question and decided to answer it. "Your defenses were designed to stop weapons like your own. You've been fighting the same way for so long that you forgot other approaches might exist. My ship doesn't try to overpower your shields. It convinces them that it's not a threat. It doesn't break through your armor. It finds the microscopic gaps between molecules and works from there." The explanation was simplified, but it captured the essential difference between Valdorian and Old One technology. The Valdorians built everything like a fortress, strong but rigid. The Old Ones built everything like water, flexible enough to flow around any obstacle and find the path of least resistance. As the demonstration continued, Marcus began receiving new information through his sensors. Ships throughout the Valdorian fleet were experiencing internal conflicts as crew members started questioning their orders. Some were demanding to know why they couldn't fight back against a single enemy vessel. Others were asking whether their mission to destroy Earth was actually justified. Most disturbing for the Valdorian command structure, several ship captains were requesting permission to withdraw from Earth orbit rather than continue a hopeless battle. The rigid discipline that had held the Empire together for millennia was breaking down as individual Valdorians faced the reality that their technological superiority was an illusion. "War leader," came a voice over the fleet communication network. "This is Captain Jun of the Dreadnought Crimson Victory. My crew is requesting clarification of our tactical situation. Are we truly unable to defend ourselves against a single enemy vessel?" Keth felt his authority crumbling as more ships reported similar crew concerns. The Valdorian military was built on absolute obedience and unquestioned confidence in their superiority. If his soldiers started doubting either of those principles, the entire command structure would collapse. "All ships maintain position and prepare for emergency protocols," Keth ordered. "We will not be defeated by primitive aliens using tricks and illusions." But even as he spoke, Keth knew that his words were becoming meaningless. The crew of his flagship could see their weapons systems failing, their defenses collapsing, and their technology being turned against them by an enemy they couldn't even target effectively. No amount of speeches about Valdorian superiority could change the reality of their situation. Marcus decided it was time for the final demonstration. "War Leader Keth, I want you to understand something important. Everything I've done to your fleet so far has been defensive. I've neutralized your weapons and disabled your systems, but I haven't actually hurt anyone. Your crews are alive and uninjured." Marcus paused to let that information sink in before continuing. "But if you try to harm Earth in any way, I will stop being defensive and start being aggressive. Would you like to see what my ship can do when it's actually trying to cause damage?" Keth stared at his tactical displays, seeing his 17 dreadnoughts floating helplessly around Earth like toys in a bathtub. The single enemy vessel that had done this to them was so small that it barely registered on most sensors, yet it had accomplished what should have been impossible. For the first time in his long career, War Leader Keth began to suspect that the Valdorian Empire might not be as invincible as he had always believed. "What do you want?" he asked, his metallic voice now carrying a note of uncertainty that his crew had never heard before. Marcus smiled grimly. Now, they were getting somewhere. Marcus considered war leader Keth's question carefully. What did he want? The simple answer was to save Earth, but Marcus was beginning to realize that this confrontation was about much more than one world. This was an opportunity to change the balance of power in the entire galaxy. I want you to understand something fundamental about the universe, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of inherited wisdom from his grandmother's people. Strength isn't about who has the biggest weapons or the most ships. Real strength comes from cooperation, innovation, and the willingness to protect others rather than destroy them. Through the Wanderer's sensors, Marcus could see the Valdorian fleet floating helplessly around Earth. Each massive dreadnought represented thousands of years of technological development and countless resources devoted to destruction. Yet all that power had been neutralized by a single ship built in a garage by someone who understood that intelligence and adaptability could overcome brute force. You speak in riddles, Keth replied, though his voice lacked its previous arrogance. Power is the only truth in the universe. The strong survive, and the weak perish. This is the natural order. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest as he thought about all the civilizations that had been destroyed because of that philosophy. His inherited memories showed him species that had created beautiful art, solved impossible mathematical theorems, and developed technologies that worked in harmony with nature. All of them had been wiped out by Valdorians who saw cooperation as weakness and diversity as a threat. The natural order? Marcus said. Let me show you what your natural order has accomplished. Marcus had Arya access the deepest levels of the Valdorian historical archives, pulling up records that even most Empire citizens had never seen. The data painted a picture of systematic genocide spanning 50,000 years and covering half the galaxy. Thousands of species have been eliminated, millions of worlds have been sterilized, and entire star systems have been stripped of resources to feed the Empire's endless expansion. But the archives also revealed something else. The Empire was dying. For the past 1,000 years, Valdorian expansion had been slowing. They were running out of easy targets, and their rigid society was becoming increasingly stagnant. Scientists who questioned established doctrine were eliminated. Artists who created anything not approved by the state were imprisoned. Engineers who suggested new approaches to old problems were branded as traitors. The Valdorian Empire had become so focused on maintaining control that it stopped growing, stopped learning, and stopped adapting. They were still powerful, but their power was based on technologies and tactics that hadn't fundamentally changed in millennia. Your empire is already dead, Marcus announced, displaying the statistical analysis on every screen in the fleet. Your birth rates are declining. Your innovation index has been negative for centuries. Your military hasn't developed a genuinely new weapon system in over 1,000 years. You're not conquering the galaxy. You're just delaying your own extinction. The data was undeniable. Population growth throughout Valdorian space had been declining for generations. The rate of new technological development had slowed to almost nothing. Even their military victories were becoming increasingly difficult as they ran out of primitive species to bully and started facing enemies with comparable technology. Subcommander Vex studied the projections with growing unease. War leader, these statistics suggest that our empire will begin experiencing critical resource shortages within the next 500 years. Our current expansion rate cannot be sustained indefinitely. Keth wanted to dismiss the analysis as enemy propaganda, but the data came from their own archives. The numbers were compiled by Valdorian statisticians, verified by Valdorian computers, and presented according to Valdorian analytical protocols. If anything, the Empire's situation was probably worse than the official records indicated. Even if these projections are accurate, Keth said carefully, they merely indicate that we need to accelerate our expansion efforts. Acquiring new worlds like Earth will provide the resources necessary to sustain our growth. Marcus laughed, a sound that carried no humor. You still don't understand. Earth doesn't have anything you need. We're not rich in rare minerals. Our technology is primitive compared to yours. Our population is too small to provide significant labor. The only reason you want to destroy us is because you can't tolerate the existence of species that might develop differently than you did. The accusation struck closer to the truth than Keth wanted to admit. The Valdorian Empire had long ago stopped expanding for practical reasons and started expanding for ideological ones. They destroyed species not because they needed resources, but because they couldn't accept the possibility that other forms of civilization might be valid. Marcus decided to press his advantage. But here's what you haven't considered. What if instead of destroying every species you encounter, you tried learning from them? What if diversity of thought and approach could solve problems that uniformity never could? To illustrate his point, Marcus began demonstrating some of the technologies his ship employed. The Wanderer's hull shifted and flowed like liquid metal, adapting its shape for different functions. Its energy systems drew power from quantum fluctuations in space itself, requiring no fuel or external power source. Its weapons could operate on 17 different principles depending on what kind of target they faced. This ship represents the synthesis of hundreds of different technological approaches, Marcus explained. My grandmother's people learned from every species they encountered, incorporating the best ideas from each civilization into their own designs. That's why they were able to build technology that your empire still can't understand. The demonstration was having an effect throughout the Valdorian fleet. Engineers who had spent their careers working with rigid, standardized designs were seeing capabilities they had never imagined. The Wanderer's adaptive systems violated everything they had been taught about how technology should work. Impossible, muttered Chief Engineer Yak from the engine room of the Eternal Dominion. Hull metal cannot change molecular structure without industrial fabrication equipment. Energy cannot be extracted from quantum foam without massive conversion arrays. Weapons cannot operate on multiple principles simultaneously without interference patterns. But the evidence was right in front of them. A single small ship was demonstrating technological capabilities that surpassed anything in the Valdorian arsenal, using approaches that Empire science insisted were impossible. Marcus sensed the growing uncertainty throughout the fleet and decided to offer them something unprecedented, a choice. I'm going to make you an offer, Marcus announced. The first and only offer your empire has ever received from species you intended to destroy. You can continue following the path that has led to stagnation and eventual extinction, or you can try something new. War leader Keth felt his worldview crumbling as he listened to words that no Valdorian had ever heard from a conquered enemy. Throughout their history, defeated species had offered tribute, surrender, or desperate pleas for mercy. None had ever offered the Empire anything valuable in return for peace. What are you proposing? Keth asked, his voice carefully neutral. Marcus took a deep breath before answering. What he was about to suggest would either change the galaxy forever or get him killed for offering aid to humanity's enemies. A cultural exchange, Marcus said. Send representatives to Earth. Let them see how a diverse civilization functions. Let them observe how cooperation between different groups can solve problems that individual species couldn't handle alone. In return, I'll share some of the technological principles my ship uses, but only if you agree to stop destroying other civilizations. The offer sent shock waves through the Valdorian command structure. For 50,000 years, their empire had defined itself in opposition to other species. The idea of actually learning from aliens was so foreign that most Valdorians couldn't even process it properly. You would trust us to visit your world peacefully? Vex asked in disbelief. We came here to destroy your species. Why would you offer us anything except death? Marcus smiled sadly. Because someone has to break the cycle of violence. My grandmother's people try to fight your empire with force, and they lost. Every species you've encountered has tried to resist with weapons and armies, and they all failed. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. The communication channels throughout the fleet erupted with confused chatter as Valdorian officers tried to understand what was happening. Their enemy had defeated them completely, demonstrated technological superiority they couldn't match, and then offered them cooperation instead of destruction. Such behavior violated every assumption they had about how conflicts were supposed to work. Captain Jeanne of the Crimson Victory was the first to find her voice. War leader, this human's offer appears genuine. Our sensors show no hidden weapons, no reinforcement fleets, no signs of deception. He seems to actually be offering peaceful contact. Other ship commanders began reporting similar observations. The single enemy vessel that had disabled their entire fleet was making no aggressive moves. Its weapons were powered down. Its defensive systems were running at minimum levels. If Marcus had wanted to destroy them, he could have done it easily while their ships were helpless. Keth stared at his tactical displays, trying to process a situation that had no precedent in Valdorian history. Every military doctrine he knew told him that defeated enemies should be eliminated immediately. Every political principle of the Empire insisted that cooperation with aliens was impossible. Yet here he was, facing an enemy who had proven his superiority and then offered friendship instead of demanding surrender. Why? Keth asked finally. You have defeated us. You could destroy our fleet and send a message that would terrify the entire Empire. Why offer cooperation instead of taking revenge for our attack on your world? Marcus considered his answer carefully. The truth was complex, involving inherited memories, moral principles, and a vision of what the galaxy could become if different species worked together instead of fighting each other. Because revenge doesn't solve anything, Marcus said. If I destroy your fleet, the Empire will just send another one. If I kill you, they'll promote someone else to take your place. The only way to really change things is to prove that there's a better way to live than the one your empire has chosen. Marcus paused, then added, besides, Earth isn't just one species anymore. We're a world where thousands of different cultures have learned to coexist. We've had wars and conflicts, but we've also learned that diversity makes us stronger. Maybe it's time for the galaxy to learn the same lesson. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion fell silent as Keth contemplated an offer that could reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. Accept, and he would be violating 50,000 years of Valdorian doctrine. Refuse, and he would be condemning his fleet to destruction and his empire to eventual collapse. For the first time in his career, war leader Keth faced a decision that would determine not just the fate of his mission, but the future of the entire galaxy. War leader Keth stood on his command bridge, staring at tactical displays that showed his disabled fleet floating helplessly around a world that should have been easy prey. In his 300-year military career, he had never faced a decision like this. Every situation had always been simple. Identify the enemy, evaluate their strength, and either destroy or enslave them. The concept of negotiation with aliens was so foreign to Valdorian thinking that their language barely had words for it. War leader, Subcommander Vex, said quietly, "The crew is awaiting your orders. Several ship captains are requesting private communication regarding this human's offer." Keth nodded slowly. He could feel the Empire's rigid command structure beginning to crack as individual officers started thinking for themselves rather than simply following doctrine. The absolute certainty that had held Valdorian society together for 50,000 years was being replaced by doubt, curiosity, and something even more dangerous, hope. "Open a private channel to all ship commanders," Keth ordered. "I want to hear their assessments before making any decisions." What followed was the most unusual military conference in Valdorian history. Instead of planning attacks or coordinating bombardments, 17 ship captains found themselves debating philosophy, ethics, and the fundamental purpose of their empire. Captain Jeanne spoke first. "War leader, my engineering staff has been analyzing the technology displayed by this human vessel. Their initial assessment is that we are witnessing capabilities that exceed our own by several orders of magnitude. If this represents standard Earth technology, then our intelligence about this world was completely incorrect. Captain Mox of the dreadnought Iron Fist disagreed. The human admitted that he is not entirely human. This ship clearly represents alien technology, possibly from the old ones that our empire destroyed millions of years ago. We should not assume that Earth itself poses a threat to our dominance. But that raises an interesting question, interjected Captain Tell from the Void Striker. If Old One technology still exists and is being used to protect other species, what does that say about our empire's claims of total victory over our ancient enemies? The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. For generations, young Valdorians have been taught that their empire's greatest triumph was the complete elimination of the Old Ones, a species whose technology and philosophy had once challenged Valdorian supremacy. If even a fragment of that civilization had survived, it called into question everything the Empire believed about its own invincibility. Marcus listened to the discussion through his connection to their communication systems, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The Valdorians were beginning to question their assumptions, which was exactly what he had hoped for. But he could also hear the fear in their voices as they contemplated the possibility that their worldview might be fundamentally wrong. Marcus, Arya said privately, I'm detecting increased communication traffic between the flagship and Valdorian command centers throughout the galaxy. War Leader Keth is reporting this situation to his superiors. Marcus frowned. He had hoped to resolve this crisis locally, but if the Valdorian High Command became involved, the situation could escalate beyond his ability to control. Can you intercept those transmissions? Yes, but doing so will reveal that we have access to their entire communication network. Are you prepared for that level of escalation? Marcus thought for a moment, then made his decision. Do it. If we're going to change how the galaxy works, we might as well start with complete transparency. Throughout Valdorian space, quantum communication arrays that had operated securely for millennia suddenly found themselves completely compromised. Every message, every order, every secret discussion between high-ranking officials was now accessible to Marcus through the Wanderer's advanced systems. What Marcus discovered made him realize that the situation was even more critical than he had imagined. The Valdorian Empire was not just stagnating, it was actively collapsing. Internal reports showed rebellion brewing on dozens of worlds, resource shortages affecting entire star systems, and growing dissatisfaction among military units that were being asked to destroy increasingly advanced civilizations. The attack on Earth was actually a desperate attempt to restore confidence in the Empire's power by demonstrating that they could still destroy any enemy. More disturbing, Marcus learned that other species throughout the galaxy were beginning to resist Valdorian dominance. The Empire's intelligence services had identified at least 30 worlds where alien civilizations were developing technologies that might threaten Valdorian superiority. The plan was to launch simultaneous attacks against all of them, wiping out any potential competition before it could mature. Earth had just been the first target. Marcus realized that his confrontation with War Leader Keth was not an isolated incident, but the opening battle in a galactic war that would determine the future of hundreds of species. If he failed here, the Valdorians would move on to destroy every other civilization that showed signs of independent development. War Leader Keth, Marcus said, reopening the communication channel, I need to share something with you. Your empire is planning to attack 30 other worlds after Earth. Species that have done nothing except develop technology that makes your leaders nervous. Are you really going to participate in galaxy-wide genocide because your empire is afraid of competition? The accusation sent shockwaves through the Valdorian fleet as Marcus transmitted copies of the classified military orders to every ship in orbit. Officers who had believed they were participating in an isolated cleansing operation suddenly realized they were part of a campaign to eliminate dozens of civilizations. These orders are classified at the highest levels, Keth protested. How did you obtain access to internal Empire communications? The same way I disabled your fleet, Marcus replied. Your security systems are designed to stop enemies who think like you and use technology like yours. They're useless against approaches you've never encountered. Captain Jun was the first to find her voice after reviewing the transmitted orders. War Leader, these documents indicate that our mission here is part of a larger operation to eliminate 37 species across 18 star systems. Many of these civilizations appear to be peaceful research communities that pose no military threat to the Empire. The evidence was undeniable. The classified orders showed detailed plans for destroying species whose only crime was developing mathematics, science, or technology that differed from Valdorian approaches. Some are planning to build their first interstellar ships. Others were experimenting with new forms of art or music. All were scheduled for extinction because they represented the possibility that Valdorian civilization might not be the pinnacle of galactic achievement. "This is not what I signed up for," Captain Tell said quietly. "I joined the military to defend our empire against threats, not to murder innocent civilians because they might someday become competitors." Similar sentiments echoed throughout the fleet as individual officers confronted the reality of what their empire had become. Many had convinced themselves that their actions were justified because they were fighting dangerous enemies. Learning that they were actually participating in preemptive genocide against peaceful civilizations shattered those rationalizations. Marcus sensed the growing moral crisis within the Valdorian ranks and decided to offer them a way out. "You have a choice," he announced. "You can continue following orders that require you to murder innocent people, or you can join me in building something better. What are you proposing?" Keth asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer would challenge everything he believed. "A new alliance," Marcus said. "A confederation of species that cooperates instead of competing, that shares knowledge instead of hoarding it, that protects the weak instead of destroying them. The galaxy is big enough for everyone, but only if we stop trying to eliminate everyone who's different from us." The proposal was revolutionary by Valdorian standards, but Marcus could see through their communication networks that it was resonating with individual crew members throughout the fleet. Soldiers who had spent their careers following orders without question were beginning to ask whether those orders were actually right. More importantly, they were beginning to imagine alternatives. The Empire would never accept such an arrangement, Vex pointed out. High Command would consider any cooperation with alien species to be treason of the highest order. Marcus smiled. "Then, maybe it's time for a new command structure. Your current leaders have had 50,000 years to prove that their approach works. All they've accomplished is creating a galaxy full of fear, hatred, and death. Don't you think it's time to try something different?" What Marcus was suggesting was nothing less than revolution, the complete overthrow of the social and political system that had defined Valdorian civilization for millennia. Under normal circumstances, such words would have been dismissed as enemy propaganda or the ravings of a madman. But these were not normal circumstances. The Valdorian fleet had been completely defeated by a single opponent who then offered friendship instead of demanding surrender. Their empire's deepest secrets had been exposed by an enemy who used that knowledge to reveal moral corruption rather than tactical weaknesses. Everything that should have been impossible was happening, forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew. "War Leader," Captain Mox said slowly, "what if this human is right? What if our empire has become something evil instead of something glorious? What if we've been the villains in our own story?" The question struck at the heart of Valdorian identity. For 50,000 years, they had told themselves that their conquests were justified, their victims deserved destruction, and their empire represented the pinnacle of civilization. If those beliefs were wrong, then everything they had done was wrong. Keth felt the weight of 300 years of military service pressing down on him. He had participated in the destruction of 43 worlds, had personally ordered the deaths of billions of sentient beings, had dedicated his entire life to expanding an empire that might be nothing more than a galactic cancer. But he also felt something he had never experienced before, the possibility of redemption. "If we were to consider your proposal," Keth said carefully, What guarantees could you offer that this alliance would not simply become another empire with different masters? Marcus had been hoping for exactly this question, because it won't have masters at all. Every species would have an equal voice in decisions that affect them. Technology would be shared freely instead of hoarded for military advantage. Conflicts would be resolved through negotiation instead of warfare. And, most importantly, the alliance would be voluntary. Any member could leave at any time if they felt their interests weren't being respected. The concept was so foreign to Valdorian thinking that many officers couldn't even process it properly. They had lived their entire lives in a strictly hierarchical society where orders flowed downward and obedience was absolute. The idea of voluntary cooperation between equals was like trying to imagine a universe where gravity worked backwards. But some of them were beginning to understand. This alliance, Captain Jin asked, would it include our people? Even after everything we've done? Marcus nodded. Everyone deserves a chance to choose a better path. Your empire has done terrible things, but that doesn't mean your people are irredeemably evil. Some of the greatest advocates for peace in human history were former warriors who decided that violence wasn't the answer. Throughout the fleet, thousands of Valdorian soldiers were listening to a conversation that challenged everything they had ever been taught. Some rejected it immediately, clinging to familiar certainties rather than embracing uncomfortable possibilities. But others began to see glimpses of a future where they could be protectors instead of destroyers, builders instead of conquerors, teachers instead of tyrants. War leader Keth made his decision. "I accept your offer," he said, his metallic voice carrying across every communication channel in the fleet. "On behalf of the crews under my command, I formally request to join this alliance you described. We are tired of being instruments of destruction. We want to become something better." The words sent shock waves throughout Valdorian space as quantum communication arrays carried news of the unprecedented surrender to every corner of the Empire. Within hours, the High Command would be mobilizing massive fleets to destroy the traitors who had dared to choose cooperation over conquest. But Marcus was ready for that fight. In fact, he was looking forward to it, because he wasn't planning to face the Valdorian Empire alone. He was going to show the galaxy what humanity could accomplish when it had allies who shared its values and enemies who underestimated its determination. The real war was just beginning, and this time, Earth would not be fighting defensively. 6 months later, the Terran Alliance included 47 species from across the galaxy, all united by the principle that cooperation was stronger than conquest. The Valdorian Empire, meanwhile, had fractured into dozens of competing factions as former soldiers chose sides in a civil war between those who clung to the old ways and those who embraced Marcus's vision of a better future. And in a small garage in Montana, Marcus Chun continued building ships, though now he had help from the brightest minds of dozens of worlds. Together, they were creating technologies that would ensure that never again would any species face extinction simply because they were different. The age of the Valdorian Empire was ending. The age of the galaxy working together was just beginning.